The destroyer USS Caldwell carved across the black waters of the Pacific, its massive body trembling with the steady growl of engines deep below. Night cloaked the ship in a shroud of secrecy, a silence broken only by the creak of metal under strain and the occasional clank of a loose chain shifting against steel. Above deck, sailors moved with practiced discipline, boots striking in rhythm as the vessel pushed forward, but below, the tension settled like mist. Petty Officer Marissa Kane lay silently in her narrow bunk, her back pressed against the cold bulkhead. She stared at the dim overhead light, which flickered now and then as the ship's wiring groaned under the constant saltwater assault. The cabin smelled of oil, sweat, and faint bleach, the fragrance of long deployments at sea. Around her, fellow sailors rested uneasily, some tossing, others snoring lightly. But even in their rest, there was a tautness in the air, a quiet knowing that something was coming. Marissa had grown used to this kind of silence. It was the silence before an operation, the pause before orders snapped like whips and chaos filled the decks. She had served for 5 years, long enough to tell the difference between routine missions and dangerous ones. This didn't feel like routine. Not with the way the senior officers had been moving all day, whispering in corridors, studying maps with grave expressions. Not with the Admiral himself, pacing above deck instead of retreating to his quarters. She rolled onto her side, adjusting the thin blanket that covered her. The ship's vibrations echoed through the mattress into her bones, like a second heartbeat that never stopped. Sleep wouldn't come easily tonight, but she wasn't the only one awake. She could hear muffled footsteps from sailors heading toward midnight watch. The creak of a hatch opening, the hushed murmur of 2 voices quickly silenced when another approached. Conversations carried in fragments, weather patterns, not natural radar contact, words that seemed ordinary, yet hinted at something more. Marissa shut her eyes, trying to slow her racing thoughts, when the ship's intercom suddenly screeched to life. The sound made half the bunks rattle with startled bodies. Someone cursed under their breath. Another sat bolt upright. Then came the voice, low, gravelly, and unmistakably steady despite its weight. "All hands," said Admiral Harlan Graves. His tone alone demanded silence. The Admiral rarely spoke over the intercom at night, unless something was urgent. "Stand by for orders. A storm is coming." The words hung in the air, sinking deep into every crevice of the steel beast that carried them. Marissa's eyes shot open. Around her, heads turned, eyes wide. The Admiral had not said a storm may be coming. He said it was. And he never wasted words. Marissa swung her legs off the bunk, her bare feet landing on the cold metal floor. Her heartbeat quickened. This wasn't a simple weather update. Weather reports came from navigators, not directly from the Admiral's mouth. His words were heavy with implication. A storm is coming wasn't about rainfall or rough seas, it was a warning. Something was about to break, and the Admiral wanted his crew alert before it did. The cabin filled with small movements, boots lacing, uniforms pulled tighter, nervous glances exchanged in silence. Nobody asked questions, not aloud. In the Navy, questions could wait. Orders could not. Marissa reached for her own boots, pulling. The laces firm. Her fingers moved automatically, years of training guiding her hands, even while her thoughts spun in frantic circles. She thought of the last time the Admiral had spoken with that tone off the coast of Somalia during an escort mission that had ended in a pirate skirmish. 3 hours before contact, he had warned the crew the same way. His instincts had saved lives that day. She stood, adjusting her collar, and moved toward the narrow corridor. The ship's passageways were buzzing now, sailors emerging from quarters, some wide-eyed with anticipation, others grimly calm. The air carried a strange charge, like static before lightning. Marissa joined the flow of bodies toward their stations. On the upper deck, the night sky stretched black and endless. But the horizon no longer looked calm. Massive clouds were gathering in the distance, churning shadows that swallowed the stars one by one. The sea had begun to shift as well, rolling. Uneasily, the waves slapping harder against the steel hull. Marissa tilted her head, squinting into the dark. The storm was real, yes, but storms were part of Navy life. The Admiral's tone had not been about rain or lightning. She felt it deep in her gut. There was something else in those waters. As she walked toward her assigned section, her mind flashed with memories-long drills in boot camp, endless hours of firefighting training, the chaos of past emergencies. But more than anything, she remembered the first lesson every sailor learned. The sea was merciless, and survival came only to those who respected it. Tonight, the Admiral was reminding them all. A sailor brushed past her, muttering under his breath, "Why'd he sound like that?" His companion hissed back, "Shut it. Just keep moving." The tension was contagious, spreading in whispers, quick glances, and hurried steps. When Marissa reached the bulkhead leading to her duty station, she paused briefly, placing her hand against the cold steel. The vibrations thrummed steady beneath her palm. For years, this ship had been her world, a floating fortress, a second home. She trusted it. She trusted her crew. Most of all, she trusted the Admiral. Still, unease lingered in her chest. She thought of her younger brother back home in Chicago, the last letter she had written him, the one that said everything was fine. She thought of her mother, who hated storms. And then she pushed it all down, burying it beneath the discipline drilled into her bones. Out here, personal fears didn't matter. Only the mission did. The loudspeaker crackled again. "Attention. Crew," the Admiral's voice carried once more, steady as stone. "Secure stations. This storm will not be routine." Marissa inhaled sharply. The words hit harder than the first. Around her, sailors stiffened, their movements faster, sharper. She could feel the energy shift. Whatever was coming, it wasn't just weather. It was bigger, darker, and closer than any of them wanted to admit. She tightened her jaw, squared her shoulders, and stepped into her station. The storm had not yet arrived, but already it was here in their minds, in their hearts, crawling through the steel of the ship itself. Marissa knew one thing: by the time this storm passed, nothing on board would be the same. The words echoed through the steel corridors, long after the intercom clicked silent. This will not be routine. Sailors had heard storm briefings countless times before warnings about gale force winds, instructions to secure gear, reminders to double-check watertight doors. Those came from officers, petty chiefs, or the navigation desk. Never from Admiral Harlan Graves himself. His voice was gravel dragged across steel, calm, yet carved with certainty. It wasn't the sound of a man giving a weather update. It was the sound of a commander preparing his crew for a trial none of them could escape. Marissa Kane stood in the narrow passageway, boots planted firm as the crowd of sailors shuffled around her. Some moved quickly toward their assignments, heads bowed. Others lingered in hesitation, faces pale, eyes darting as if searching for someone to confirm it. Was nothing. But nobody dared laugh off the Admiral's words. His reputation was carved from battles and storms alike. If he said danger was coming, then danger was already in the water. She adjusted her uniform, tightening her collar as she joined the line moving toward the damage control stations. Around her, fragments of whispered conversation drifted through the air like smoke. Why him, though? Why Graves himself? He's been through the Bering incident, that's why. He knows when the sea's hiding something. Routine. Storms don't earn that tone. The whispers died whenever an officer passed. Nobody wanted their doubt heard. Yet the unease pressed heavier than the salt-saturated air. When Marissa reached the ladder well, she paused, gripping the railing before climbing. The ship rocked harder now, the first hints of the storm's swell pushing against steel. Shadows flickered with each roll, the fluorescent lights buzzing. In protest, she steadied her breathing, climbed, and emerged onto the weather deck. The sight stopped her cold. The horizon was vanishing into a heaving wall of black. Clouds gathered like armies, stacking higher and higher, their bellies flashing with faint streaks of lightning. The Pacific, restless even on calm days, now rose in swells that made the destroyer groan. Salt spray carried on the wind, stinging her face. It wasn't the worst she had seen, but something about it felt wrong. The sea was shifting faster than charts predicted. "Keep moving," a chief barked, shoving sailors toward the forward section. "Secure lines, double-check gear, and lock every hatch." "No shortcuts," Marissa snapped to action, pushing her awe aside. She joined her team along the starboard side, where thick ropes slapped against the deck. Together, they wrestled heavy coils back into place, tying them down before the next swell could wash them free. Her muscles burned, but her focus sharpened with each knot. This was what she trained for, fighting chaos with order, bringing structure to storms. Still, her thoughts circled back to the Admiral. He hadn't just said storm. He'd said this will not be routine. Those words carried more weight than lightning or waves. As she worked, the Admiral himself appeared on deck, flanked by 2 senior officers. He walked slowly, scanning the sea like a hunter studying prey. Even soaked in mist, his posture remained unyielding, shoulders square, eyes sharp beneath the brim of his cap. Every sailor straightened at his presence. Graves stopped near the bridge ladder and raised his voice. No microphone needed. "Listen close," he said. "This ship has weathered storms before, but this one carries more than rain and wind. Intelligence confirms we are not alone out here. Enemy patrols are using the cover of weather." A hush fell so absolute that even the crashing waves seemed to pause. Marissa's throat tightened. Around her, sailors exchanged startled glances, their worst suspicions realized. The Admiral continued, each word deliberate. "The storm will test our steel, but men will test our spirit. We will not falter. You will hold stations, you will follow your training, and you will trust one another. This crew will endure. Do you understand?" A unified shout followed. "Aye, Admiral." It rang strong, though Marissa could hear the cracks in voices, the thin edges of fear tucked beneath duty. She felt it in herself, too. Her heart hammered, but her hands steadied. As she tightened one last knot on the rope before saluting, the Admiral's gaze swept over them, hard but not unkind. Then he nodded once, sharply, before turning back toward the bridge. His words lingered in the air, pressing into every sailor like a brand. Marissa exhaled, breath fogging in the cold. She realized her fists were clenched, nails biting into her palms. Enemy patrols, not just storm, not just survival against nature. Human adversaries, waiting to strike when the sea broke their defenses. Her friend from the next bunk, Tyler Briggs, sidled up beside her, wiping sweat from his brow. "You catch that," he muttered, voice pitched low. "Every word," she answered. Tyler's jaw flexed. "You think he's bluffing? Trying to scare us straight?" Marissa shook her head. "Graves doesn't bluff. If he says they're out there, they're out there." They exchanged a long look, unspoken fears heavy between them. Tyler finally nodded, shoulders squaring. "Then we'll be ready." The ship lurched suddenly, a wave slamming hard against its flank. Both of them grabbed the rail, feet skidding. Water sprayed up, soaking them to the bone. Shouts erupted across the deck as sailors scrambled to secure loose gear. Marissa coughed. salt burning her throat, but forced herself upright. There was no room for hesitation now. As the night deepened, preparations turned frantic. Ammunition was checked, damage control kits distributed, and medical stations stocked for casualties. That hadn't even happened yet. Every step, every order, carried the urgency of inevitability. Below deck, the atmosphere shifted too. The mess hall was filled not with laughter or cards, but with hushed prayers, sharpened knives, and eyes glued to doorways. Sailors wrote hurried. Notes for loved ones, stuffing them in waterproof bags. A tradition no one spoke about, but all understood. Marissa took her place in the engine compartment, her assigned station during high-alert conditions. The roar of machinery filled her ears, hot air making her skin slick. She moved through checklists with her team, tightening valves, inspecting gauges, and ensuring pumps could withstand flooding. Her body acted on training, but her mind replayed the Admiral's words. Not routine. Enemy patrols. The storm outside was building. The storm inside was already here. As midnight bled into early morning, Marissa leaned against a bulkhead, wiping sweat from her forehead with a rag. The steel beneath her vibrated harder, each shudder a reminder of waves battering the hull. Her stomach twisted not from seasickness, but from the knowledge that at any moment alarms could sound, and the storm outside would turn into battle inside. She thought of the Admiral again, how he had looked at them, not with false comfort, but with the steel-eyed truth that they were walking into danger. Yet beneath it was something else, confidence. He believed they could survive. Marissa clung to that belief, wrapping it around her like armor. She didn't know what the next hours would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. When the Admiral said a storm was coming, he was never wrong. And this storm was only beginning. The storm announced itself before sunrise. The sea heaved in restless convulsions, waves striking the hull like fists against iron. Every slam reverberated through the destroyer's skeleton, rattling bunks, lockers, and teeth alike. Steel groaned. With each roll, as if the ship itself recognized the weight of what was coming. Marissa Kane braced her hands on the narrow sink in her quarters, splashing cold water onto her face. Her reflection in the small steel mirror looked foreign, pale, eyes wide, jaw clenched. She had faced storms before, even firefights, but never both at once. Never like this. A sharp knock rattled her door. "Kane," came a voice. It was Briggs, her bunkmate and closest friend aboard. "Briefing. Let's go." She dried her face with her sleeve and followed him into the corridor. The passageways hummed with hurried footsteps, the clang of boots on steel, the murmur of anxious conversation quickly silenced whenever officers appeared. The ship rolled hard to port, sending them both stumbling into the bulkhead. Briggs cursed. Under his breath, hell of a way to start the day. They arrived at the briefing room, where sailors crowded shoulder to shoulder, their uniforms damp with salt spray. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Every man and woman braced for words they both needed and dreaded. The Admiral stood at the front, his frame rigid, uniform immaculate despite the storm. His presence silenced the room without effort. Graves scanned the crowd before speaking, his voice steady and deliberate. "You've seen the weather. You've felt the sea under your boots. This storm will push us to our limits. But it's not the only force out there." He paused, letting the words sink in like stones dropped into still water. "Intelligence confirms enemy patrols in this sector. They are using the storm as cover, hoping to strike when our defenses are stretched thin." A ripple of unease passed through the room. Someone muttered a curse. Another sailor whispered, "I knew it." Marissa's heart pounded, each beat echoing in her ears. She gripped the edge of her seat, nails digging into the wood. The Admiral continued, "You will be tested on two fronts, by the sea and by The enemy. If the storm doesn't break us, they will try. But let me be clear, this crew has trained for this. You will trust your ship. You will trust each other. And together, we will not falter. His eyes swept across the room, locking briefly with Marissa's before moving on. She felt the weight of his gaze settle deep in her chest. It wasn't comfort, but it was conviction. He shifted, gesturing to the operations officer beside him. Charts unrolled across the table, lines of coordinates marked in red. Enemy vessels. Spotted on radar sweeps here and here, the officer explained, tapping the map. We expect them to use the worst of the storm to close distance. Standard tactics won't apply. Visibility will be near zero. The Admiral cut in. That means we rely on discipline. You will hold stations. You will execute without hesitation. Fear has no place here. Silence followed, broken only by the distant rumble of thunder. Then came the sharp, unified response. Aye, Admiral. The meeting dissolved into hurried motion. Solars rushed toward their assignments, voices raised in clipped commands. The storm roared louder outside, wind howling through steel cracks. Rigs leaned toward Marissa as they exited. Enemy patrols in a storm. They couldn't dream of. A better chance to sink us. Marissa shook her head. They couldn't dream of a tougher crew to fight either. Her voice carried more confidence than she felt, but it steadied Briggs. They split off to their respective duties. Marissa joined her damage control team in the lower compartments. The air smelled of oil and machinery, hot and suffocating. Tools clattered as sailors checked and rechecked their kits, patching plates. Pumps, fire hoses. Her hands moved automatically, tightening clamps, securing valves. Every motion drilled into her through endless training now carried the weight of survival. Her team leader, Chief Ramirez, barked orders over the hum of engines. You know your jobs. Fires, floods, ruptures, handle them before they spread. The storm doesn't wait, and neither will the enemy. Keep your head straight. Marissa nodded, adrenaline sharpening her focus. Yet beneath the discipline, fear gnawed at her stomach. Storms were chaos enough, walls of water, lightning, the ever-present threat of capsizing. But add enemy ships into the mix, and chaos became something darker, more lethal. The hours dragged as preparations mounted. A storm outside intensified, waves hammering the destroyer with relentless force. Alarms blared intermittently as compartments sealed, loose equipment tied down, and systems checked under pressure. Marissa's uniform clung to her skin, soaked with sweat and salt. At one point, a young sailor beside her dropped a wrench, hands trembling. Marissa caught his wrist, steadying him. Breathe, she said firmly. We're trained for this, one task at a time. He nodded shakily, gripping the tool tighter. Her own fear never left, but she buried it beneath the mask of calm. She knew others needed it. Above, the battle stations prepared as well. Gun, crews loaded ammunition, their faces set in grim lines. The smell of gunpowder drifted faintly through the ship, mixing with salt and oil. Radar operators hunched over screens, eyes straining against flickering blips. Medics arranged stretchers and supplies in the infirmary, bracing for casualties. The destroyer became a living organism, every sailor a cell in constant motion. The storm outside howled, but inside the crew forged themselves into steel. As the shift wore on, Marissa felt exhaustion tugging at her muscles, but the Admiral's words kept replaying in her head. If the storm doesn't break us, they will try. It wasn't just a warning. It was a promise that they were stronger than both storm and enemy. Toward evening, she found herself back on deck, rain pelting like shards of glass against her face. The sea rose in monstrous swells, waves towering higher than the ship itself before crashing down in explosions of spray. The sky was a black, cauldron, lightning ripping it open in jagged flashes. Through the chaos, she saw the Admiral again, standing firm near the bridge, his coat whipping in the wind. He gripped the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon as if he could see through the storm. His presence anchored them all, a human compass pointing true north. Briggs appeared at her side, shouting over the wind, "Look at him! He doesn't flinch." "Not once," Marissa nodded, though the storm drowned her voice. The Admiral was more than a commander. He was a pillar. If he could stand against the storm, so could they. Night fell, bringing no relief. The storm only grew stronger. Waves, battering steel, lightning splitting the sky. The destroyer rolled violently, yet held firm. Below, the crew worked without pause, patching leaks, hauling gear, tending to minor injuries. The anticipation of enemy contact hung heavier than the storm itself. In the darkness of the lower deck, Marissa leaned against a bulkhead, her body aching, her mind racing. She thought of home, of her brother's laugh, her mother's quiet prayers, the life she had left behind. But she also thought of the Admiral's eyes in the briefing, steady and unyielding. The storm raged outside, but the greater storm, the one born of men with weapons and intent, still waited beyond the horizon. Marissa closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a long breath. When she opened them again, she felt the steel resolve settle in her chest. Whatever came, waves, fire, or enemy guns, they would meet it head-on. The destroyer pressed forward into the night, bracing for the storm's peak. And with it, the enemy's shadow crept closer. The storm struck with no warning, as if the heavens had torn open all at once. A wall of black water rose out of the night, towering over the USS Caldwell like a living beast. The ship's prow climbed it stubbornly, engines groaning, before, crashing down the far side with a thunderous impact that rattled bolts loose. Sailors staggered across decks, clutching rails, their shouts drowned by the roar of wind and water. Petty Officer Marissa Kane dug her boots into the slick steel, every muscle burning as she hauled a line into place. The rope writhed like a serpent in her grip, salt spray stinging her eyes. Around her, her team wrestled with loose gear, fighting to secure it before the storm could hurl it into chaos. "Hold it down," Chief Ramirez bellowed over the storm. His voice was raw, but it cut through the noise like steel. Lightning split the sky, turning night into a strobe of white-blue light. For a heartbeat, Marissa saw the fear in her crewmates. Eyes wide, frantic, human, but the next instant it was gone, replaced by raw determination. The ship rolled hard to port, throwing them all against the bulkhead. Marissa slammed her shoulder into steel, pain exploding across her arm, but she refused to let go of the rope. "Lock it!" she shouted, her voice shredded by wind. Together, they tied it down, a knot barely holding against the relentless pull. Another wave crashed over the deck, soaking them to the bone, salt water filling their mouths and ears. It wasn't just rain now, it was the ocean itself, clawing to rip them free. Below deck, alarms blared. A pipe burst in the forward compartment, sending steam hissing through narrow corridors. Marissa's radio crackled with frantic voices, flooding in Section 12. "Need pumps now. Go," Ramirez barked. "Kane, you're with me." They sprinted below, boots pounding against slippery ladders. The air grew hotter as they descended, the storm's roar replaced by the hissing scream of ruptured pipes. Water gushed through seams in the steel, rising fast around their ankles. Sailors struggled with pumps, dragging heavy equipment into position. Marissa dropped to her knees, hands working fast to clamp a split pipe. Her fingers slipped, metal, biting into her skin, but she pressed harder, forcing the clamp into place. Steam scalded her arm, the pain sharp and immediate, but the leak slowed. She shouted for a wrench, and a sailor shoved it into her palm. Together they tightened it, the hiss fading into silence. For a brief moment, relief washed through her. One problem solved, 100 more waiting. The ship groaned, a long, deep wail, as another wave slammed into its flank. The lights flickered, plunging them into brief darkness, before the emergency glow bathed the compartment in eerie red. Briggs's voice came over the radio, broken by static. Enemy radar contact confirmed bearing east. No engagement yet. Marissa froze, wrench still in her hand. The enemy was out there, circling like wolves in the storm. She felt the weight of the Admiral's warning settle heavier than ever. Not routine, not just weather. Her team kept moving, hauling hoses, sealing doors, fighting back the sea inch by inch. Hours blurred into one another. The storm showed no mercy, each wave stronger than the last, each gust of wind howling like a banshee. At one point, a young sailor slipped on the flooded deck, smashing his head against the bulkhead. Marissa dropped beside him instantly, fingers finding a pulse, relief flooding her when she felt it. She wrapped his wound in cloth torn from her sleeve, pressing it tight. "You're not going anywhere," she muttered, half to him, half to herself. Above, cannons thundered not at the enemy yet, but test firings against the storm, ensuring barrels stayed clear. The sound reverberated through the hull, a reminder of what was coming once the enemy struck. Marissa's muscles screamed. With fatigue, her uniform clinging to her skin like a second layer of salt. She could barely feel her fingers, raw from rope burns and steel edges. Yet she kept moving. So did everyone else. The ship demanded it. At last, Ramirez called for a brief pause, giving them minutes to breathe. Marissa leaned against the bulkhead, chest heaving, sweat and seawater dripping from her face. She thought of home, her brother's grin, her mother's kitchen, the warm smell of bread. The memory hurt, sharp and distant. But it fueled her too. She closed her eyes, listening to the storm's relentless hammering. Each crash against the hull reminded her of the Admiral's voice. This will not be routine. And she believed him more than ever. Suddenly, the intercom screeched to life. The Admiral's voice filled the compartment, calm despite the chaos. "Crew of the Caldwell, the storm is testing us, but we are holding. Hold your lines, hold your faith, and hold your courage. The ship does not break, neither do we." A cheer rose, raw and defiant. It wasn't much, but it steadied hearts. Marissa lifted her head, eyes meeting those of her crewmates. Exhausted, battered, drenched, they still stood, still fought. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if enraged by their defiance. Waves battered harder, lightning ripped the sky apart. But the Caldwell pushed forward, steel against sea, crew against chaos. Marissa tightened her grip on the wrench, forcing, her trembling hands steady. The storm would not break them. Not tonight. The storm reached its apex with the kind of violence that defied description. Waves rose like black walls, higher than the destroyer's decks, and crashed down with bone-crushing force. Each impact sent the Caldwell groaning, as though the sea itself wanted to drag her into the abyss. The deck pitched so steeply that sailors had to cling to rails, boots sliding across slick steel. Salt water filled the air, a choking mist that blurred eyes and drowned every shouted command. Marissa Kane was waist-deep in icy water in Section 12, bracing herself against the torrent that refused to yield. Pumps screamed in protest as they strained to keep up, their engines rattling against bolts that threatened to tear free. Her team wrestled with hoses, patched ruptures with trembling hands, and fought the sea inch by inch. Her body burned with exhaustion, muscles screaming for rest, but there was no pause. The storm didn't give breathers. It hurled one blow after another. A wave slammed the hull with such violence that the lights flickered and died. For a heartbeat, they were swallowed in darkness. Then emergency lights snapped on, bathing the compartment in a hellish red glow. Water shimmered crimson, like a battlefield painted in blood. Pump 3's failing. A sailor shouted. "Switch to backup," Ramirez bellowed. His voice, ragged but unyielding, cut through the roar. Marissa dove toward the failing machine, her fingers numb as she reconnected cables and slapped switches into place. Sparks hissed, but the backup roared to life, spitting water through its hose. Relief was fleeting, but it was enough. Her radio crackled through static. Bridge to all stations, enemy contact confirmed. Missiles inbound. Marissa froze. Around her, sailors looked up, faces pale. The words were barely audible, drowned by storm and static, but the meaning was clear. The enemy had chosen their moment. An instant later, the ship shuddered not from the sea, but from impact. A deafening explosion rattled the hull. Steel screamed, pipes burst. Men and women were thrown against bulkheads, cries of pain swallowed by the chaos. Marissa hit the deck hard, air blasting from her lungs. Water surged over her, dragging tools away, ripping at her body. She clawed to her knees, coughing salt water, ears ringing. Smoke seeped through the corridor, acrid and choking. Fire. In Section 10, a voice roared over the radio. "We need extinguishers now." Another voice screamed. "Casualties on the main deck. Medics." The storm was no longer their only enemy. Now, amid its fury, missiles and shells joined the assault. The sea and man fought together to crush them. Marissa shoved herself up, chest heaving. "Get those hoses moving," she shouted, voice raw. Her hands found the wheel of a watertight door, forcing it closed against the flood. Her palms slipped, skin tearing, but she didn't stop. Behind her, Ramirez dragged a wounded sailor onto higher ground, blood streaming down the young man's temple. Above, the ship's cannons thundered, their recoil shaking the deck. Explosions lit the stormy sky in flashes of fire and lightning. The destroyer fought back, its crew firing blind into rain and chaos, trusting radar and instinct. Marissa staggered into the passageway, eyes burning from smoke. The air was thick with heat and salt, each breath like knives in her lungs. She saw Briggs rushing toward her, his face streaked with grime. "You're alive," he shouted, grabbing her shoulder. "Barely," she gasped. He pointed aft. "We've got flooding in Section 8 bad. They need every hand." Together, they sprinted through the corridor, dodging bursts of steam and collapsing panels. The ship rolled violently, throwing them against the walls, but they kept moving. Their boots splashed through rising water, each step a battle. When they reached Section 8, chaos reigned. A missile strike had torn through the hull, jagged steel twisted inward. Water poured through the breach in a furious torrent. Sailors fought to patch it, hauling steel plates into place, sparks flying from welders who worked without hesitation, despite the rising flood. Marissa waded in, her arms screaming as she grabbed a plate and forced it into position. Briggs held it steady while another sailor welded. The heat seared their skin, sparks raining over wet uniforms, but they held firm. Every second mattered, every breath of air stolen back from the sea was survival. Another explosion rocked the ship, throwing them all against the wall. The plate slipped, water surging harder. Marissa's head slammed into steel, stars exploding in her vision. For a moment, the world tilted, sounds muffled, vision blurred. She fought to stay conscious, to push back the dark. Briggs's voice cut through, desperate and sharp. "Marissa, stay with me." She blinked, forcing herself upright. Blood trickled down her temple, mixing with seawater, but she grabbed the plate again. "Hold it," she croaked. Together, they forced it back into place. The welder moved fast, sealing the edges as water fought to reclaim its ground. At last, the torrent slowed, then stopped. Marissa collapsed against the bulkhead, chest heaving, limbs trembling uncontrollably. Briggs slumped beside her, eyes wide with exhaustion. Around them, sailors moved like ghosts, bloody, soaked, but unbroken. Above, the Admiral's voice rang over the intercom, steady as ever despite the chaos. "Crew of the Caldwell, you are holding the line. The storm and the enemy will not break us. Stand firm. Fight on." Marissa closed her eyes, letting his words sink into her bones. She was battered, bleeding, exhausted beyond measure, but she was still alive. They all were. She opened her eyes to the sight of her crewmates, still fighting, hauling hoses, dragging. The wounded, patching steel. The storm still howled, the enemy still fired, but the ship still stood. And so did they. The storm had raged for so long that time itself seemed to dissolve. Hours blurred into one endless fight against water, fire, and fear. The destroyer's decks were scarred, its hull battered, but still the Caldwell pressed forward. Its crew had become shadows of themselves, faces pale, eyes ringed with exhaustion, uniforms torn and soaked, but they fought on, driven by duty and by something deeper. Marissa Kane felt it in every bone of her body. Her arms trembled from overuse, her legs ached with each step, and the cut on her temple throbbed with each heartbeat. Yet when the alarms wailed again, she was moving before she realized it. The storm howled above, waves smashing the ship with merciless rhythm. Each crash sent spray into the air, turning every breath into salt and pain. Lightning split the sky with savage brilliance, illuminating the deck in flashes of ghostly white. For a heartbeat at a time, the world was frozen in sharp clarity faces. Strained with effort, steel bent and scarred, the endless wall of water beyond. Then, in one blinding flash, Marissa saw them. On the horizon, dark shapes rode the waves. Not shadows, not illusions ships. Enemy vessels, their outlines stark against the lightning. Massive silhouettes cut through the storm, their guns aimed like predators closing in. Her stomach tightened. They weren't just fighting the sea anymore. Now the hunters had come into view. "All stations stand by." The Admiral's voice thundered over the intercom. Calm, commanding, unshaken. Enemy vessels confirmed. Battle stations. "This is direct engagement. We hold our ground here." The words struck like iron through weary hearts. The crew who had been crawling through smoke and salt straightened. Men and women who had been on the edge of collapse gritted their teeth and grabbed their stations. Exhaustion was still there, gnawing at every limb, but the call to fight burned brighter. Marissa sprinted to the deck, rain slamming into her face like stones. The world above was a maelstrom of fury. Black sky, thrashing sea, lightning tearing it open. Her boots skidded on wet steel as she climbed toward her gunnery station. Briggs was already there, his hands steady on the controls, despite the tremor in his arms. "You see them?" he shouted. "Like monsters in the dark," Marissa answered. Breathless. The destroyer's guns rotated with mechanical precision, their barrels locking onto coordinates relayed by radar. Each flash of lightning revealed the enemy closer, looming larger, waves crashing against their hulls as they advanced. "Fire control ready," Briggs reported into the radio. The order came seconds later. "Engage." The Caldwell's cannons thundered, their recoil shaking the entire ship. Shells ripped into the storm, blazing arcs vanishing into rain. A heartbeat later, Explosions blossomed across the horizons. Some misses, some deadly strikes. The enemy answered in kind. Fire tore through the night as shells screamed overhead and slammed into the sea, geysers of water rising higher than the fin. Decks. The storm and battle fused into one chaos. Thunder roared with cannon fire. Lightning flashed with explosions. Waves collided with falling shells. It was impossible to tell where the sea ended and the war began. Marissa gripped the controls, guiding the gun toward her target. Her heart hammered in her chest, each breath ragged, but her aim was steady. She fired again and again, the recoil slamming into her body. Each shot tore pieces of the storm away, each blast a scream of defiance. Then the ship lurched violently. A shell slammed near the stern, tearing steel and spraying fire. Sailors screamed as they were thrown into railings. Smoke poured upward, carried by the wind. Damage control stern section, move! Ramirez's voice crackled over the net. Marissa wanted to go, to run and help, but her station demanded her. Briggs grabbed her arm, eyes fierce. Stay. We've got this. She nodded, forcing her body to obey. Duty was heavier than instinct. Another lightning flash lit the world, and Marissa's breath caught. The enemy was closer now. One ship, cutting straight through the storm, its guns blazing with ruthless intent. She saw figures moving on its deckmen, who wanted them sunk, swallowed by the sea. Briggs swore under his breath. They're not letting up. No, Marissa said, voice steady despite the fear twisting inside her. Neither are we. The cannons roared again, drowning her words. A shell from the Caldwell struck home, detonating on the enemy's bow. Fire erupted, smoke curling upward into the rain. A cheer rose from the crew, raw and hoarse but fierce. The storm didn't care. It howled louder, waves smashing into the destroyer, water pouring across the deck. Sailors fought to stay upright, clinging to their stations as nature and war battered them together. Through it all the Admiral's voice returned, calm as stone. This is the hour we prove what we are. The storm breaks, the enemy breaks, but not us. We are the line, hold it. Marissa's chest tightened at his words. Her body was failing, her strength nearly gone, but her spirit burned hotter. She wasn't alone. Every sailor beside her felt it too. They were more than a ship. They were. Defiance made flesh. Cannon fire thundered. Lightning tore the sky apart. The sea raged. The battle had begun in full. And the Caldwell, scarred but unbroken, sailed straight into it. The storm was no longer just weather. It was a battlefield painted in thunder and fire. The Caldwell staggered under the combined fury of nature and steel. Her decks were twisted, scarred with flame and shrapnel. Whole sections flooded, despite desperate efforts to hold them. Smoke poured from the stern, flames licking hungrily where a missile had punched through. The crew moved like warriors from another age, bloodied, exhausted, and still fighting, because to stop meant death. Marissa Kane barely recognized her. Reflection in a shattered panel. Her face was smeared with soot, salt water, and blood. Her eyes, though, burned with the same unyielding fire as those around her. She staggered toward Section 9, where alarms wailed without pause. A shell had ripped into the heart of engineering, tearing apart pipes and power lines. The compartment was half submerged, steam hissing from ruptured conduits, sparks spitting where wires touched seawater. Sailors fought like demons, patching. Leaks with trembling hands, dragging the injured from debris, their boots slipping on flooded decks. Pressures dropping. Ramirez roared, his voice raw with strain. If we lose this feed, we lose propulsion. Marissa forced her way to the valve, muscles screaming as she spun the wheel. The handle fought back, frozen with rust and damage. She pushed harder, every fiber of her body burning, until finally it groaned and turned. Steam hissed free, pressure gauges climbing back to safety. Cheers went up, ragged and short-lived. Another explosion rocked the ship, sending them sprawling. Above, the Admiral's voice cut through the intercom, steadier than the storm itself. All hands, listen closely. The enemy fleet has us outnumbered. They've marked us for destruction. But reinforcements are en route. If we hold this line, they will arrive. If we falter, the sea claims us. Marissa gripped the bulkhead, listening with every ragged breath. I will not lie, the Admiral continued. This storm and battle have broken many of us. Yet we remain. Our mission is simple. Buy time. Every second we stand is another second closer to survival. Hold. Fast. The words galvanized the crew. Men and women who had been ready to collapse rose again, taking stations, manning weapons, dragging hoses. They were not just fighting for themselves, but for each other. But the enemy pressed harder. Through flashes of lightning, Marissa glimpsed one of the enemy destroyers closing fast, guns blazing. Its shells rained down with merciless precision, tearing into the Caldwell's hull. One struck near Section 10, ripping open steel and sending sailors flying. Another slammed into the main deck, fire roaring upward in a deadly plume. Briggs's voice screamed over the radio. We've got critical damage. If we don't vent the ammo hold, she blow. A chilling silence fell for half a heartbeat. Every sailor knew what that meant. Venting would flood the compartment and trap anyone inside. The Admiral's reply came, heavy as stone. Do it. No hesitation. No wavering. Just the hardest order a commander could give. Briggs's voice was steady, but Marissa heard the pain underneath. I, Admiral. Venting now. Marissa froze. She knew who was in that section, young Petty Officer Ellis, barely out of training, who had worked beside her only hours before, laughing despite the storm. He was still in there. Ellis! Marissa shouted, grabbing her radio. Get out of Section 10! Now! Static crackled. Then his voice, faint but calm. Can't, ma'am. I'm pinned. You'll have to flood it. Her throat tightened. We'll get you out, just hold on. No time, Ellis said softly. Do it before we all go. Tears blurred her vision, but the Admiral's voice returned, firm. Lieutenant Briggs, vent the hold. There was no choice. The command had been given. Briggs executed it, his hand steady, though his jaw was clenched tight. Valves opened with a hiss, and seawater poured into Section 10. The explosion that might have ended them never came. But neither did Ellis. The silence in the aftermath was heavier than the storm. Marissa bowed her head, rain and tears indistinguishable. Around her, sailors moved with grim determination. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to. Sacrifice was written into every breath they took. The battle raged on. The enemy destroyer bore down, but the Caldwell's guns roared back, fire lighting the storm. Marissa manned her station again, eyes burning, hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. Each shell she fired carried Ellis's memory with it. Target her engines, Briggs shouted. They fired in unison, and by some miracle or sheer defiance the shells struck true. The enemy destroyer shuddered, flames ripping across her deck. Sailors cheered through cracked lips as the vessel slowed, listing to one side. For a moment, hope flared. Then another lightning flash revealed two more enemy ships closing from the north. Marissa's heart sank, but the Admiral's voice cut. Through again, unyielding. Reinforcements are minutes away. Hold the line. Give them nothing. Every sailor clenched their fists tighter, braced their bodies harder, and poured their last strength into the fight. The storm had taken their rest. The battle had taken their comrades. The Admiral had taken their innocence with his order. But they still had their will. And that, even the sea couldn't break. The sea had swallowed ours in chaos. A Caldwell was no longer the sleek destroyer that had sailed into the storm. Her decks were scarred, pocked with craters, and bent steel twisted like broken ribs. Smoke and flame curled from wounds in her hull, while water poured into compartments that refused to stay sealed. But she still floated, defiant. Against the storm, against the enemy, against all odds she remained. Orissa Kane could hardly feel her arms anymore. Each motion felt like dragging lead weights through fire. Her skin was raw from salt and smoke, her throat torn by screams and orders. Yet she moved, again and again, because there was no other choice. Lightning tore open the sky, revealing 2 enemy vessels closing in from the north. Their guns flared, arcs of fire streaking toward the crippled destroyer. Explosions tore across the sea, geysers rising higher than the decks. One shell slammed into the bow, tearing it open like paper. Another struck near the command tower, sending sailors sprawling in showers of sparks. Marissa's ears rang, her vision blurred. She thought for a moment the world had gone silent, then realized it. Was her body shutting down? She bit her lip until she tasted blood, forcing herself back to awareness. Around her, Briggs barked commands, his voice hoarse but unbroken. Ramirez dragged a sailor with a shattered leg across the deck, leaving a trail of blood in the rain. The Admiral's voice came again, steady as always, carrying over the intercom like an anchor in the chaos. "We have minutes until reinforcements. That's all we need. Hold fast." His calm ignited sparks in every heart. They weren't fighting for victory now. They were fighting for time. Every second they survived was one closer to rescue. The guns roared again. Marissa locked onto a target, her vision narrowing to the rhythm of aiming and firing. Her cannon spat flame, shells streaking into the storm. One struck the enemy's flank, tearing metal and sparking a fire that battled the rain. But the destroyer pressed forward, relentless. Another shell screamed in, striking near her station. The explosion hurled her off her feet, her helmet smashing against steel. For a moment she couldn't breathe, her body refusing to move. Then Briggs's hand was on her arm, dragging her up. "You're not done yet, Kane?" He roared. She coughed, blood on her lips, and forced herself back to the controls. He was right. She wasn't done. Not while the ship still floated. Not while the Admiral still spoke. Not while Ellis's sacrifice still burned in her chest. Then came the worst. A shell punched through the stern, striking near engineering. Alarms screamed, red lights flashing across every panel. Ramirez's voice cracked over the radio. "Admiral, we've lost power to pumps 3 and 4. Flooding uncontrollable." Marissa froze. Without those pumps, the sea would swallow them. The Admiral didn't flinch. His reply was iron. Seal the compartments. Save the ship. Everyone knew what that meant. Sailors were still inside those sections. To seal them would be to bury them alive. But hesitation meant death for all. Ramirez's silence lasted only a breath before he answered. "Aye, Admiral." Sealing now. Marissa's chest ached as the heavy doors slammed shut, cutting off screams she would never forget. The Caldwell shuddered, steadied, and kept afloat. Lives had been traded for survival. Tears stung her eyes, but she never lifted her hands from the gun. The enemy ships were close now, their decks lit with fire and thunder. One aimed straight for the crippled destroyer, intent on finishing her. Briggs swore under his breath. "If they board us, it's over." "No," Marissa said, her voice low, steady. "We'll sink before we give them that." The Admiral seemed to hear her unspoken vow. His voice boomed across the ship. "Every shot counts. This is our stand. Give them nothing but fire. The Caldwell answered. Every gun, every missile, every weapon that still breathed thundered into the storm. Marissa fired until her arms shook uncontrollably, until the cannon smoked with heat. Briggs bellowed target after target, his throat raw, his face streaked with blood and rain. Ramirez. Ellie damage control with torn hands, dragging hoses, patching steel, shouting men back into the fight. The enemy destroyer drew closer, looming like a predator through the storm. Its guns flashed, pounding the Caldwell. But just as it closed within striking range, the sea lit with fresh fire. Reinforcements. American warships surged from the horizon, cutting through the storm with their guns blazing. Missiles streaked across the sky, slamming into the enemy vessel. Explosions ripped it apart, fire devouring steel as the ship rolled and vanished into the waves. The second enemy ship turned to flee, only to be shredded by the combined fury of the fleet. Cheers erupted across the Caldwell, broken, ragged, but alive. Some sailors fell to their knees, sobbing with relief. Others simply stared at the horizon, unable to believe they had survived. Marissa collapsed against the rail, every muscle trembling, tears mixing with rain. The storm still raged, but its fury seemed hollow now. They had endured the worst, and they were still standing. The Admiral's voice came one last time, softer now, yet carrying the same unshakable strength. Crew of the Caldwell, you have done more than hold the line. You have shown the sea itself that it cannot break us. Tonight, we endured the storm. Tomorrow, the world will remember what you did here. Silence followed, heavy with loss, pride, and exhaustion. Marissa closed her eyes, hearing Ellis's last words echoing in her heart. She would carry them forever, just as every sailor would carry the weight of those lost. When the storm finally broke, dawn's first light spilled across the ocean. The sea was calm, its fury spent. The Caldwell, scarred and battered, limped toward safety. She was no longer the ship that had left port, but something greater, a legend born of fire and storm. And her crew, every man and woman still breathing, knew they had written themselves into history. Not because they had survived, but because they had refused to break. The storm ended, but the memory would never fade.